Dear guests of honor, hello and welcome to the official book launch of Oxygen, Parables of the Pandemic Anthology, the second anthology of River Pop Press. It is a great pleasure to have our honored guests and contributors such as Jack Foley, Phyllis Becker, Annie Finch, Richard Modiano, Nikki Posse, and Kalpana Singh-Chitnis. Before we begin the book launch, we would like to introduce all our guests of honor, beginning with the chief guest, Jack Foley. Jack Foley has published poetry, criticism, stories, and a 1,300-page history of California poetry from 1940 to 2005. With his late wife Adele, he became known for his multi-voiced choruses, a practice he has continued with his new life partner, Sungay Land. He has presented poetry on radio station KPFA regularly since 1988 and is currently one of the hosts of KPFA's literary program, Cover to Cover. His most recent books are the companion volumes, The Light of Evening, a brief autobiography, and A Backward Glance or Traveled Roads, an autobiography of the poet's mind. Phyllis Becker is a poet and writer and the coordinator of the Riverfront Reading Series in Kansas City, Missouri. Her book, How I Came to Love Jazz and Other Poems, was published in 2008. Two of her poems have been set to jazz on the compact disc Poetry of Love, produced by jazz vocalist Angela Hagenbach. She has a book forthcoming from Scapegoat Press this year. She has extensive experience in juvenile justice reform and is a senior fellow with the Full Frame Initiative, a national social change organization. Annie Finch. Annie Finch's 6 volumes of poetry include Eve, Calendars, finalist for the National Poetry Series, Spells, New and Selected Poems, and Among the Goddesses, a Sarasvati Award from ASWM in 2012. She has also published translation, feminist criticism, and the anthologies A Formal Fling Comes, Poems in Form by Contemporary Women, Villanelles, and Choice Words, Writers on Abortion. Her poems have appeared on stage at Carnegie Hall and in the Penguin Book of 20th Century American Poetry. She holds a bachelor's from Yale and a PhD from Stanford and was awarded the Robert Fitzgerald Award for her lifetime contribution to the study of versification. Richard Modiano. Richard Modiano is a native of Los Angeles. From 2010 to 2019, he served as executive director of Beyond Baroque Literary Arts Center. In that time, he produced and curated hundreds of literary events. Richard is a rank-and-file member of the Industrial Workers of the World. In 2019, he was elected vice president of the California State Poetry Society. The Huffington Post named him as one of 200 people doing the most to promote poetry in the United States. Next is Ninke Salverda Posse. Ninke Salverda Posse was born and raised in the Netherlands. Her work has been published in Calyx, Gulf Coast, Red River Review, Ilia's Honey, and the Anthology of New England Writers, among other journals. Her poetry has been anthologized in River of Earth and Sky and Pandemic Puzzle Pieces, Carrying the Branch, and Conestoga Zen. Together with Rustin Larson and Christine Schrum, she is co-editor of the poetry anthology Leaves by Night, Flowers by Day. Her story, The Kiss, was nominated for a Pushcart Prize, and her essay, Ohm Else and the Swan, was a finalist in the 2014 Editor's Prize of the Missouri Review. She's director of the Low Residency MFA in Creative Writing at MLU, and of the Soul Ajar, offering workshops that intersect writing, creativity, and healing. Lastly, Kalpana Singh-Chitnis is a Pushcart Prize-nominated, award-winning Indian-American poet, writer, filmmaker, and author of 4 poetry collections. Her works have appeared in notable journals such as World Literature Today, Columbia Journal, California Quarterly, Indian Literature, Silk Route Project, IWP at the University of Iowa, and Stanford University's Life in Quarantine. Her works have been translated into 14 languages. Poems from her award-winning book Bare Soul and her poetry film River of Songs have been included in the Nova Collection and the Polaris Collection, Lunar Codex time capsules going to the moon with NASA's Nova Sea lander missions to Oceanus Policarium in spring 2022, and NASA's Viper rover mission on the lunar South Pole in 2023. Kalpana's poetry has received praise from eminent writers such as Nobel Prize in Literature nominee Dr. Wazir Aga, Vopstrov Award, and Ordis des Arts et Lettres recipient Amrita Pritham, and poet and Academy Award-winning lyricist and filmmaker Gulzar. A former lecturer of political science, Kalpana Singh-Chitnis is also the editor-in-chief of Life and Legends, the translation editor of IHRAF Rights, and an advocacy member of the United Nations Association of the USA. She holds a degree in film directing from the New York Film Academy and works as an independent filmmaker in Hollywood. Her next poetry collection, Trespassing My Ancestral Lands, is in the making. Now, I would like to invite the founder and director of River Paw Press and editor of Oxygen, Parables of the Pandemic, Kalpana Singh-Chitnis, to introduce the anthology to the audiences and share with us what inspired the book.
Thank you, Nirvan, for inviting me. In fact, I'm going to read my editor's note if it's okay. As I write this note of Oxygen Parables of the Pandemic, the virus celebrates the newest addition to its family, Deltacron. According to the astrologers of medical science, the love child of Delta and Omicron is supposed to be the noblest among all known members of the COVID-19 family. What this phenomena tells us is apparent. The virus is not going anywhere. It will stay with us, and we must learn to live with it. We owe enormous gratitude to the scientists around the world for finding the vaccines that have saved millions of lives. We also owe to the leaders who have understood the need to rise above political rivalries, selfish instincts, and boundaries of nation to come together to find solutions for diseases, hunger, and war for the sake of humanity. However, many world leaders do not seem committed enough to healing the planet. The pandemic was not enough for them to destroy the world, so the invasions of smaller countries must continue, and they must profit from the misery of humankind. The sunflower fields are charred. Ukraine is bleeding before our eyes, and we have allowed this to happen without guilt. It is heartbreaking and numbing. Coronavirus outbreak shook the world to its core, and we helplessly watched our friends, family, and loved one leave a little too soon, and the world economy destroyed, forcing millions into poverty and homelessness. It has been over 2 years since the virus was detected, but the hospitals are still admitting COVID-19 patients worldwide, and people are dying of the virus and several health issues caused by it. At the same time, we must not forget the courage and dedication of our doctors, nurses, and essential workers who have saved countless lives by risking their own since the pandemic struck. The generosity of the world community to help people in need, food, medicine, vaccines, and much more has shown the best of humanity. It is only relevant to mention that I had booked my travel for Vietnam, Thailand, and South Korea in 2020, without knowing that an unprecedented event would soon change everything for the whole world in the most harrowing way. I was supposed to be in Hanoi, Hue, and at Plum Village in Thailand with a group of Buddhist practitioners on a retreat and possibly meeting Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh. I was supposed to moderate a panel of writers at AWP in San Antonio before traveling abroad, but the pandemic dismantled every plan I had made. The way the world events were unfolding, gripping lives with severity. After the outbreak of the coronavirus, literature, art, and meditation were the only things to anchor me safe on an isolated island of uncertainty, preventing me from drowning in despair. The most painful thing was being separated from my children, not seeing my ailing mother in India in her final days and attending her funeral, followed by emotional and financial setbacks. But I was not ready to give in to despair and turned my confinement at home into a retreat. I began to meditate on the impermanence of life more fervently than I ever did before. The result of this meditation brought me a sense of urgency and taught me to appreciate life more and more. I turned to nature and found extended joy in watching the sun, clouds, and rain. I delighted in speaking to birds and animals, feeding them and caring for plants and trees. I cooked and ate the healthiest food, took Ayurvedic supplements, and continued with yoga, which I have been practicing since childhood. I took upon things I always wanted to do, but was not finding time for them. The dreadful days of the pandemic renewed my commitment to life and profoundly inspired my creativity, including conceptualizing a collection of poems on pandemics of the century, that later turned out to be oxygen parables of the pandemic, focused on COVID 19 only. The concept of the anthology inspired the Oxygen Project at Riverpaw Press, and I raised funds for Give India and Project Hope to help COVID 19 victims in India. I also decided to turn some of my poems into films. My education in film directing at NYFA came into practice at a humbling time, and I selected a few verses from my poetry collection, Bare Soul, to translate them into moving images. Little did I know at that time that I would survive the pandemic and my poetry film, River of Songs, and my poems would travel to the moon in a time capsule with NASA's mission in 2022 and 2023. Sometimes I'm fascinated by how universe pours out its gifts to make up for our losses. The pandemic took many things away from us, but also gave gifts in return: the gift of awareness of our well being, the lesson to value life and our relationship with our environment and the rest of the world. Here I want to quote Vietnamese Zen master and monk Thich Nhat Hanh, nominated for Nobel Peace Prize by Martin Luther King. The tears I shed yesterday have become rain. The works in this collection, like rain, water the seeds of our consciousness to break from the illusion of our separateness. In our fragile existence and sufferings, we are one, and together we have created this anthology to dedicate our work to the world so we can be aware of our neglect, celebrate the joy of our survival, and understand the importance of our mindful actions in saving our planet. There is nothing profound in a calamity, but the lessons we derive from it and how we stand with courage and optimism in the face of adversities. Thank you. I also want to acknowledge those who have supported the publication of this book. On behalf of Riverpaw Press, we want to thank all contributing poets and translators of Oxygen Parables of the Pandemic. I also want to thank our managing editor, Singh-Chitnis, for his endless hours of work in putting this book together for all of us. A very special thanks to Jack Foley, William O'Daly, Phyllis Baker, Louis P. Jones, Susan Rogers, Manish Suri, Amata Natasha Goldie, Mega Sood, Ruth Furtado, Stephanie Masek, Carol Douchy, Anil Chitnis, Shashwat Chitnis, Vishwa Chitnis, and Nirvan Chitnis for their support and donation to our Oxygen project at River Pop Press, through which we raised substantial fund in 2021 for Give India and Project Hope, nonprofits fighting COVID-19 in India. Thanks to everyone. Now, I want to invite Jack Foley to officially launch the anthology Oxygen Parables of the Pandemic.
Can you see this? I can't tell anymore. My image just went very small. Okay. Mallarmé said, our generation was troubled by the trembling of the veil of the temple. So we're going to unveil this. Nothing up my sleeves. This is it magically appearing. And out of this,
Thank you, Jack.
there it appears. Oxygen. Both sides. Here we are. Stuff inside. All kinds of good stuff, including that wonderful introduction, by the way. That was very, very moving, account. I really love the introduction, and I hope I can say something good about it here. My own remarks, a quotation from another wonderful book. It's a really interesting book, published in 1907, edited by Natalie Curtis. It's called The Indian's Book, and it was right at the point when everything was disappearing. Everything was going under. And she came up with this book. She actually recorded with an Edison machine in 1907 their songs and things like that. And it's a marvelous book. The book is entirely the voices of various tribes of the Indians. It's got Geronimo's song. He didn't write it, but it was his song. That's a shaman song. And it sounds a little bit like Hello, My Baby. And just, it's a terrific book, with her transcriptions of Native American music and so on and so forth, and everything they say, which is fascinating. So I begin with a quotation from that book. The Great Spirit is in all things. He is in the air we breathe. And that was said by Bidagi, whose name meant Big Thunder of the Wabanakis. Everything is here, both what we fear and what we hope for. All of it is covered in this remarkable anthology, Oxygen. We need to see in words what it is we are experiencing, which is complex enough. But this is a book of poetry, and so we need to go beyond that. In poetry, words leap beyond themselves into an area we feebly call, remembering Shakespeare, Coleridge, Wordsworth, Blake, imagination. The task for the poet is to reach out into that world without abandoning this one. One of the poems in Oxygen answers the announcement that, quote, it's after the end of the world, with which world? The word breath appears in almost every poem in this book, and it is deeply relevant both to the horrible virus and to poetry. The breath in our mouths forms words. This book takes many approaches to coronavirus. Editor Kalpana Singh-Chitnis is surely right when she says hope isn't a luxury, it is a necessity. And right as well when she says, oh, for oxygen, oh, for oxygen, oh, for oxygen, oh, captain, my captain, rise up and hear the bells. She is also right when she says the virus is not going anywhere. It will stay with us, and we must learn to live with it. But Kelly Russell Agaddon and Melissa Stoddard are right too when they speak of the old song of walks and telephone calls, a woman baking bread with the windows open. We pause, and with the silence of highways, we finally hear the birds. Yet these writers also say, teenagers in isolation play ukulele until 1 a.m. Sadness follows them like a moon to their online prom. D. Allen is also correct when he writes, fear of some tiny debilitating germ has sealed off the miracles, half of nature, from us. And in her country of dead, Lana Heckman Ayers watches as the refrigerated morgue truck pulls up behind the hospital for the newly COVID dead, whose numbers exceed normal storage capacity. Lopa Banerjee asks, what parable do I compose in isolation? And answers, in parables we break open, in parables of our shiny, pregnant past, our light of truth shines. We seek answers to the sneaky dance of sudden deaths. Our fugitive lives wax and wane, rough edges smoothen, moored between flesh and ashes. These are only a few of the extraordinary responses to the coronavirus epidemic contained in this book. There are many more, including comic moments, so as Nikki, Nikki? Salvere Passi's A Lesson in Empathy, a cento, a poem made up of lines from other poems. The Barcelona Opera House, the Gran Teatre del Liceu, resumes its theatrical season with a concert attended by 2,292 potted plants. In addition, I'm fascinated by the moment when a word that has meant one thing for centuries begins suddenly to change its meaning. Since the early 17th century, the word disinterested has meant impartial. It has not meant not interested. A disinterested party is someone who is neutral about a subject. Recently, influenced no doubt by words like dislike and disaffiliated, not liking, not affiliated, disinterested has begun to mean not interested, a meaning which had previously been expressed by the word uninterested. The new meaning can be found in this book. He hated my disinterestedness in his gifts and bouquets of flower. Over 100 years ago, Ladakat's Lessa Eagle Chief of the Pawnee tribe remarked that all things in the world are two. A coin has two sides. An arrow both feeds and kills. What, after all, can we do with death except talk back to it? It is our breath that enables speech. Breath, as in the first breath we take, is the agent of life. In this sense, as we talk back to it, even death can generate life. Even death can deliver oxygen. We're in the grip of what seems to be a new God. Song is unending. A God who distributes death in vast numbers. Song is unending. This false God warns us not to act, not to do, but to stay put in the shell of our lives and fear. Song is unending. He is fierce and powerful, so that we need to believe we will be better for the experience when the experience, if the experience ends. We do not know his name, though we see his crown everywhere. Do not touch. Stay separate. Song is air. Song is air. He may take our breath. And Kalpna asked me to read a poem in my little segment here from the book, and I will, something. I have I enjoyed everything actually in the book. I thought it was quite marvelous. And there are several sonnets in the book. All right. Uh, good for formalism. Um, this is a sonnet by Tim Taylor, Emergence. Like stunted trees huddled against a storm, we have grown inwards in protected space. What was once punishment is now the norm. Each of us makes a prison of the place we call our home, warily creeping out only for reason of necessity. When promised freedom, we are racked with doubt. How strange, unsettling it feels to see the doors of houses opening like flowers. We still cling to our reassuring chains, scared to reclaim the world that once was ours. Worries and what ifs echo in our brains. But it is time to win back what was lost. I step outside, keeping my fingers crossed. That's my speech. Thank you for asking me to do it, and I hope you guys enjoyed it.
We have Mr. Richard Modiano joining us now, so we'd like to welcome him. So I would like to thank Jack Foley for launching the book and honoring us with his presence. And also I'd love to again thank you from River Pop Press for being the top donor in raising substantial funds that really did help the victims for that deadly second wave in India. And again, thank you again for highlighting those common themes that we see throughout the book and all those kernels of truth that are also peppered throughout the anthology. I think you really explain that very succinctly, and I like that. So now we're going to move into the second phase of the event, where all our honored guests are welcome to share their reflections on the pandemic, as well as on the anthology Oxygen Parables of the Pandemic. Moreover, I'd also like to invite them to read their poems that were published in the Oxygen anthology. We will start with Ms. Phyllis Becker.
Thank you. I want to thank Kalpna and Nirvan and all those with River Press. It's very much an honor. Jack, your words were beautiful and moving. Like all of us, I have experienced the darkness and the shock and the loss and the grief and the learning and the love and light that this pandemic has brought to us. Like many poets, I've written several poems about this evolving pandemic. And when River Paul Press put out the invitation to send poems, I was so happy to do that. I have been honored to get to know Kalpna through another reading. And when she asked for donations to the very good causes, I felt like it was something I could do. And I was happy to have a way to express something in a positive way during the early pandemic. I'm also very happy and have enjoyed the wonderful perspectives and of the words of the writers in this collection as they give us a deeper understanding and meaning of the pandemic, as well as about ourselves and this world. I have two poems, and they represent different stages of my personal understanding and experience with the pandemic. The first poem is about me coming to grips with the pandemic. And it is entitled, The World Coughs. It's as if day turned into night in the middle of the afternoon, like a full eclipse. And now we find ourselves sheltering in place. Today, the thunder and lightning sound like the rolling and cracking of huge bowling balls soothes me, matches my mood. I lie in bed, go inward, back to a time sewing with my mother. Each fabric chosen, pattern penned, cloth cut through my 8th grade anguish. And then, with my hair freed from chemicals, my buoyant fro, and the beautiful clothes I sewed to fit my tall, skinny frame, I was altered. Now, 50 years later, my mother alive only in dreams, I rouse at 5 a.m. and hear what I now call my birds urgently chirping me out of my waking despair. Our world coughs, and we have nowhere to run, nowhere to go. Yet it is a new day. I have bed hair, clothes that fit, food to eat, savor each breath. And the second poem is during that stage that I experienced with the pandemic of great frustration. It's called What Goes Around. I am working hard not to wish this virus on you because it is wrong, and the virus will do what it does. I have no control, even as you risk my life or someone's poor grandma, since you choose not to cover your mouth and nose. The irony is you are saved by those you mock. I have to work even harder not to wish the virus on you or someone close to you as an object lesson, because it's that kind of wish that can backfire and something you might do. The words and science of respected men and women don't sway you. It's you swaying others to listen to that little devil on their shoulder, risking thousands. Oh, how I do not wish the virus on you or others like you. I won't risk my peace of mind. It won't go away with wishes or denial. You or I cannot control it. And did I not hear that someone close to you got it? Someone close to me. The virus will do what it does. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Becker. I loved especially What Goes Around. I feel like I share some of those frustrations that I think we were all experiencing, because it got so divisive at some points during the pandemic, and it was really hard to understand people and where they were coming from. And I think you really put that into words very well. Next, I'd like to introduce Mrs. Annie Finch.
Thank you, Kalpna, for an important book. And it's wonderful to be here and to see the other contributors and guests here. For me, as a devotional poet and a philosophical poet, I found the pandemic, when it first hit, I was asked to contribute to an anthology, and I started writing a poem for it, and it took me so long to finish that I missed the deadline for that first anthology, and it took me about a year to really complete it. And I think it's because I was trying to find the right balance between the gravity of the situation, the people who were dying, the danger, but there was also a spiritual dimension that, as an American who's been, or a citizen of the United States who's often been so appalled by the shallowness of our culture in so many ways and the way we don't really face death, I found it a rather moving opportunity to contemplate things in a deeper way. At the same time, there was no traffic in the city where I lived. The birds were very loud. I was seeing videos of animals on the streets and the skies over Delhi and India being blue for the first time in decades, I guess. And so I tried to find the right balance. And this is the poem that I wrote. It's called, and that's in the anthology, My Only Pandemic Poem. And I'm so happy to have it here. It's called Masks, Flowers, Garlic. It has an epigraph. Death is also a woman who plows the fields. Jennifer Goldwasser. Masks, flowers, garlic. Hands are washed, breath held. A wedding band is twisted. Someone's voice will carry low, then find itself at last alone and slow with the unfinished. What is left to plan? She shakes the silence that has locked us so with steady feet. The truths of her demands, like bird songs, carry far more than we'd planned they ever would above the traffic's flow. So we sing and clean, reach out as best we can, plowing our days past mercy or the blow. Masks, flowers, garlic will be ours to show when she who's come to stalk with open hands, whispering, hold it close or let it go, unfurls the reaping there is left to sow.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Finch. It's a very special privilege to have published your only poem on the pandemic. I enjoyed your poem, especially the symbolism. The symbol of garlic has long been used as a means of protection against evil and malevolent spirits, and masks are being something that protect us and others, and flowers, something that we leave at the graves of our lost loved ones. And I like the way you end your poem by highlighting how humans reap what we sow. And that really reminded me of Mrs. Becker's poem, What Goes Around. And I think that goes to show the universal consciousness of writers and poets and highlight the common themes and truths we all experience. And I think that's demonstrated throughout this anthology.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we'd like to introduce Mr. Richard Modiano.
Well, thank you for having me, and many thanks to Kalpna for putting together this fine anthology. It's a beautifully produced book from Riverfall Press, a really distinguished small press publisher that's done a lot of good work. To me, the pandemic, I have to admit that I was not prepared for anything of this magnitude happening. I knew that the safety net that had been established in the U.S. had been shredded just before it broke out. And it's beyond coincidence that this happened. And this shredding of the safety net and the failure to address the pandemic in its early stages by U.S. authorities, it's irresponsibility on an unbelievable scale. And the consequences will be with us for a long time to come. It's in the very early months before treatment had been perfected. Several people that I knew, either closely or distantly, died within the first 3 months. It was, I'm sure that's been the case with a lot of people. So it was shocking, and I think that really a lot of people are suffering the effects of PTSD from that and will be for a while. So, and I hope this book, this anthology, Oxygen, the title itself has many, many implications, but I hope that it aids towards healing us from this ordeal, which frankly is not over yet. So with that, I'm going to read my poem, When the World Ends. White dust will fill the air like the curtain at the end of a play. A rain of desperate bodies will fall from the windows of burning buildings, drumming the concrete below. Men with splinters in their eyes will stumble through the streets choked with debris. Women clutching babies will poke through the rubble and tear out their hair. Our generation will go to its grave shouting its last words into a cell phone, or perhaps it will arrive as a thief in the night, step by invisible step. Factories will disappear, and corporations vanish into thin air, taking jobs and retirement funds with them. Cities dying from the inside out will spread like ringworm, the shrapnel spray of suburbs slicing through forest and field. Wars will reach from continent to continent and neighborhood to neighborhood. The terrorists won't make peace with the horrorists, who would enforce it at any price, who keep trying to impose harmony between oppressed and oppressor with fear and firepower. Gas prices will rise with global temperatures and tides. Acid rains will fall with the last of the redwoods. Computer systems crash with stocks and stock markets. A virus spreading from an outdoor market from spittle carried on the air that blankets the globe until one day everyone has COVID. Or else the pandemic will abate. Business will continue as usual. Prison guards pace concrete tombs. Psychiatrists contemplate madness. Demons glare from the eyes of ministers. Consumers bought and sold in the marketplace. It's after the end of the world, whispers the homeless man. Didn't you know that? Others, mysterious and knowing, who have held themselves aloof from the discussion until now, finally interject, which world? Thank you. And then once again, thank you very much, Kalpana and Nirvana, for hosting this. Again, it's my sincerest wish that this anthology reaches as many hands as possible because I think it has great potential for healing. So once again, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Modiano. This is a very thought-provoking poem, and I enjoyed the last part, last lines, where you bring up the homeless man, who highlights the fact that it's already after the end of the world. Didn't you know that yet? I really like that part. Thank you for that. Next, I would like to introduce Mrs. Posse to read her 2 poems and share a few thoughts.
Yeah, for me, everything that you've all shared resonates so strongly with me. The pandemic came so out of the blue. I was with my family in the Netherlands that Christmas before, and when I came back, it hit very quickly. And at the time, my sister-in-law was ill with terminal cancer, so that was the first death in our family. But my other sister-in-law actually was in India. My husband's from India, and was in that wave that you were talking about, Kalpana. And I really resonated with everything you said because we had her on the phone and we did not know if she was going to make it. And she did not have oxygen. So this book could not be more to the point of what it felt like to talk with someone who has no breath, no hospital bed to go to, who's passing out, who's throwing up, and no one can take her in. And we are a continent away. So it hit very close. A lot of people close to me died of all kinds of things. I think 15 people close to me died in the last year and a half. Most not of COVID. My sister-in-law in India made it, so we're really happy about that. And it was just a real time of turning inward. I live on a little tiny pond in Iowa right now, and this whole period was about setting up this MFA program and the community of that Kalpana has been part of as well, and I'm so grateful for that. She's been an absolutely wonderful addition. And this little pond became kind of my life because life shrunk in every way, and it went online. And so being in my garden and gardening and the geese that passed over and the little tiny things happening around this pond, they kind of were a regeneration and a healing and a soothing. So my poems kind of are about that. And I also wrote this funny poem quoted earlier about a hilarious little article about Eugenio, let me look up his name, Eugenio Ampudia, a Spanish composer who wrote a concert called For the Biocene, where he invited to this empty theater in Barcelona where there's no people coming together, all these potted plants. And he played to the potted plants to communicate what it was like for humans to feel, to go through the pandemic. And he wanted to have the plants share a transformative experience. So first I'm going to read the poem that's first in the anthology. It's called Today When I Can Do Nothing. It came out of a prompt in Molly Fisk's poetry group, and I'm so thankful to Molly because that group kind of saved my life. The first line, Today When I Can Do Nothing, came from a poem by Jane Hirschfield, Today When I Could Do Nothing, that she wrote during the pandemic, and Molly gave us that line as a prompt. Today, when I can do nothing, I hug our maple as if it were the body of the man I love, who is not here, but an ocean away, perhaps sipping wine on his patio on a hot spring evening, watching the lit eye of the half-blind moon. The bark feels shaggy under my fingers, rididome of narrow longitudinal fissures deepening into gray ruffled ridges, formation of multiple layers of suberized periderm, cortical and phloem. Green leaf lungs breathe above me, shivering with wind the way my alveoli expand under my coat, inside my flesh, on a loop from my first conscious breath in the morning when I rise from dream, till evening when I dream again. Everyone knows that trees are the lungs of the earth. The lungs of the earth burn in Australia, Oregon, California, but we humans pay too little attention. Now people's lungs in hospital beds fill with fluid, drowning us from the inside. A virus invades, pushing out air. A virus invisible to the naked eye brings to its knees the world economy. Clouds still travel overhead without keeping social distance, their voluptuous bodies tightly pressed together, but I can go nowhere. I sit on the back steps and drink tea from a chipped cup, listening to the soft chants of the chimes, the rustle of leaves, the whispering wind. Then I walk around our still snowy yard, where the first frail green sepals of rosebuds sprout, where catfish glide under the cellophane liquid surface of Loudon Pond, no longer stiffened with ice. I whisper into the crowns of the maple, the birch, the oak, and place my palms softly on familiar bark, letting each tree know that I will do better, helping it breathe, helping it live. The second poem is a found poem, really, from an article that I read in El País, and it was about that concert, the concert for the biocene for all the potted plants. It's called A Lesson in Empathy. The Barcelona Opera House, the Gran Teatre del Liceo, resumes its theatrical season with a concert attended by 2,292 potted plants. The plants, raised in nurseries across the city, are all lushly, fancifully dressed in green. A string quartet named Ucali delivers an 8-minute rendition of Giacomo Puccini's Crisantemi. The musicians bow to the leafy audience. Nature reclaims spaces humans took for granted, artist Eugenio Ampudia explains. He adds, the performance extends the concept of empathy to other species, striking new balance. In the background, plays on a loop a susurration of wind whistling through trees, which serves as a plant applause. The language of music is supposed to tell the plants what humans have endured in these past 3 months of quarantine, how confined human lives have been, how hard it is to live within 4 tight walls, forced to be idle, patient, lonely, waiting. The 2,292 plants in their tight ceramic pots sit still and listen, like they always do. Thank you for putting this beautiful anthology together. I can't wait to read it. I just got it in the mail. Thank you, Kalpna, for all the work you've done, and Nirvana. And thank you for that beautiful introduction, Jack. It was very deeply moving the way you summarized everything, and your story too, Kalpna, of how this book came to be.
Thank you so much for those poems. I really loved the lesson in empathy. I remember reading that article, and it was quite a funny picture to see all those plants in an empty theater. But I love how you go on to show the empathy of plants, and also in your first poem, you also highlight um, the commonalities between those forest fires that were happening in California and everything, and later how trees breathe, and how we breathe too, and we are both afflicted by nature. And also, all of these poems were great. Mr. Richard Modiano's poem, I love that that last part with the homeless man, it's after the end of the world already, right? Didn't you know that yet? I really like that end part of the poem. And with Miss Finch, that symbolism of you know masks, flowers, and garlic is very profound, and it really does tie to the pandemic. Now, lastly, I would like to introduce Kalpana Singh-Chitnis to read her poems in the Oxygen Anthology, and also to read the title poem that inspired the title of this book.
Thank you, Nirvan. Let me begin with the first poem. The title of this poem is The Poet is Gone. The poet is gone, the poet is gone, leaving a chest behind. In the chest, there are 1,000 letters to a dictator, hundreds to his followers, and one to himself about his dream of becoming a singer and someday living on farmland. His being as a poet was accidental. The burden of earning bread and butter had dragged him to the city from his mountain abode. From the capital's streets to the bulletin room, he covered every piece of news and more. He was worried about pollution and the virus that could kill the masses of nations in droves. In his worries, he forgot all about his dreams. And as he sipped his last drink and made one last ring of smoke, sitting at his writing table, he realized it was too late. His organs gave up, his lungs collapsed. Tied in a hospital bed all alone, he wanted to sing but couldn't. He tried to write a note but failed. The poems he wrote were timbers from the mountains. Fired up with his spirit, the flame he ignited lit many candles and consumed his dreams. The poet is gone, the poet is gone, leaving a legend behind. The second poem is At the Sound of Suzumi. Behind the masks are eyebrows, cheekbones, and jawlines. The faces have disappeared. The one who has stolen all faces have no face. Or maybe it does. 6.25 million and counting, stretched up to the horizon in the arena. It appears on the stage like a kabuki performer and disappears with a generation stuffed in kimono. It is the dance of the century. The sky is a drum beating all night. We slip on the mask of the moon and dance alone, and together we learn the steps unlearned. At the curious sounds of Suzumi, we rise, breathing deeply, and breathless we fall. And the last poem is the title poem of this book called O Captain, after Walt Whitman. You cannot blame it all on June gloom. Sitting in your living room, surfing channels, watching plague, politics, and war. I turn the TV off and read Whitman. Oh, Captain, my Captain, oh, the bleeding drops of red. I can't wait for the sun to arrive in the Eastern Hemisphere. The night sails like a mammoth ship in dark rivers, scooping the dead. My father, mother, sister, and brother are ailing. Friends have left too soon. Hark, I hear the faint moaning of the cities shackled from afar. The buildings hang from the sky lifeless, their tongues out the windows. The doors are locked, but the oxygen has escaped. There aren't enough shouts and wood left in the market. Like doctors, nurses, and essential staff, the forests working around the clock are making oxygen, coffins, and kindles for cremation. The animals on the graves appear orphaned. Their masters have left. The banyan trees stand humble in the country, carrying clay pots hanging from their neck, like the bhishtis offering water to the thirsty souls wandering in the state of Bardo. Shiva roams with his third eye open in villages and towns and charnel grounds, emitting fire from the center of his brows, lighting pyres of the abandoned or river beds, drinking toxins flowing in the water to purify the rivers. Covered in ashes amidst the embers flying, he contains the spread. He does not exhale. He is blue, turning darker blue. The Himalayas melt in grief. The Ganges widens her shores. There are more pyres on the ground tonight than stars lit in the sky. The truth sounds like a lie, but it isn't. There aren't enough beds and oxygen in the hospitals. There aren't enough vaccines and medical supplies. Who is accountable? Who is accountable? Who is accountable? I beg for help. Help the helpless. Friends who couldn't come forward have promised they will forward my plea to the rich NRIs, a slap right in my face. For the first time, I'm angry for not being wealthy enough, like Gates, to help my country breathe with one fat check. Why do I worry? 33 million gods will take care of everything. Why do I bother? 1.36 billion people will manage their country. Oh, sister, you'll be okay. Oh, mother, try to sleep now. I shall breathe for you with my lungs expanded to the continents. Hope isn't a luxury, it is a necessity. I invite the bell and sit in silence. I write an alphabet on a piece of paper and repeat until it burns the hole in my heart. Oh, for oxygen. Oh, for oxygen. Oh, for oxygen. Oh, Captain, my Captain, rise up and hear the bells. Thank you.
And now, this concludes the book launch. I would like to thank all of our honored guests for your profound words and enriching poetry. The Oxygen Parables of the Pandemic anthology is available for sale online at riverpawpress.com, along with every major online retailer. We also urge everybody watching to like and subscribe to the River Paw Press YouTube channel, and also to click the notification buttons so you receive updates on our new uploads and live streams. Lastly, we invite all of you for the forthcoming events of River Paw Press, which includes the International Reading Series of Oxygen Parables of the Pandemic, along with the second and third phase of the International Book Launch. Thank you all for joining us.